The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, good evening. It's Christine J Hart, and welcome to the Fifth Route. And the Fifth Route is the new name of the show. I hope you like it, guys. So it's a really cold, chilly evening in England. I have just got out of the bath in my dressing gown, and I have just finished reading the Little Book of Haig, or the Little Book of Hugar, whatever it's called, and I only paid £5 for it, but I have to say, don't buy it. It's just nonsense. It's the Danish word for cozy. So you've got a whole book waffling about what Haig actually is, and then a few pages actually telling you how to get it. And really, it's just cocoa and candles and blankets, and it's just cozy. It's what everyone else in the world, apart from Denmark, calls cozy. So all this Haig or Hig or Hugar, whatever it's called, it's a gimmick. As always, I feel a bit annoyed actually. I paid £5 from Tesco for that. So I'm going to try and bring it back actually. So we have a guest tonight on, and Mars Johnson isn't joining us. He normally does, as you know, but he isn't joining us tonight. We have an intellectual coming on the show, someone who's been a friend of mine for a long time. And he is coming on the show tonight, just in a few minutes, because he's getting in from work. And he is a really, really interesting person. He is called Adrian Morgan, and he used to be, he is currently a published author, a designer, and he's been writing since 2006 on Islam and terrorism. And he used to host a weekly radio show called Global Security Matters. But tonight he is going to talk about the clash of civilizations. So that's going to be interesting for us. I was going to bring somebody else on, but I didn't have time to sort somebody else out. So what I'm going to do is encourage you to go to the Revolution Radio chat room, and there you can heckle Adrian and you can shout out to him, and I will relay your messages and relay your questions. So that's Revolution Radio. Just go to the chat room, tune in and message me. Just I will be looking out for your comments, and I will put the questions to Adrian. So I am going to bring him on now. So I don't like to bring my guests on while I am waffling. So let's hope he's an entertaining guest, or we shall cut him off, won't we? Mid talk. Oh dear, I've added someone else on there. Who is that? I've added two people on. So let's just get rid of one. Oh, I can't do that. So here we are. I think I'm adding two people to the call. Never mind. I don't know who that person is. Don't worry. So he should be coming on now.
Hello there.
Oh, hi, Adrian. Welcome to Revolution Radio.
Hi. If I sound a little bit strange, please tell me, and I'll see if I can try and play with my controls at this end.
No, you sound absolutely perfect. Clear as a bell.
Excellent.
Lovely. So welcome to the show. And what are we going to talk about? I noticed you said the clash of civilizations.
Yeah, the concept of it. I mean, whether we are really having a clash of civilizations or not.
Right.
It's something which has been talked about a lot. And then recently, with all of these massive changes geopolitically going on, we've got Putin has become suddenly expanded. We've had people in Britain voting for Brexit when we'd been within the European Union since 1972. And what's happening in America with Trump coming into power on the back of his talking about not wanting Muslims in America to come in without being vetted first, and also talking about his database of Muslims. There are the issue of Muslims as well within Germany. That's been used as an argument for a lot of the problems going on, that Germany's welcoming of migrants. How has the West exacerbated the problems in the Muslim world? These are all issues, and I'm not trying to be anti-Muslim at all. What I want to just discuss is, how is the world changing now in ways which we haven't seen before, and in particular, the rise of Salafism, whether what's been happening in Iraq and in Syria with the rise of ISIS, was that really something created by America invading in the 17th, or was it the 18th of March 2003, or was it something that was always on the cards? And various other divisions. So that's roughly my remit. It's a pretty big remit, and it can involve 2,000 years of history if one wants.
That's okay. Do you want to go back to the start? Because I don't really know much about, the start of where where the Muslim religion came from. I think it was just started by somebody, wasn't it?
Right, okay, well, it was started by Muhammad. Now, he died in 632 AD. Now, he initially lived with a woman called Khadija, and she was a merchant, and he became an expert in merchandising, and, he did all of her business for her. And he, in a cave called the Al-Nur cave, which means the cave of light in Saudi Arabia, he heard voices and had this vision of the Jibril, the angel Gabriel, coming to him and giving him messages. He was about 40 years old at that time, and this was about 590 or so AD. And his wife, Khadija, persuaded him that he wasn't going mad, which was what he initially thought, and that these were divine revelations. And eventually he expanded. He got, using his links in the trade of caravan trades, across Arabia. There was a man called Abu Bakr who was very rich and powerful, who became his friend, and they expanded their trade. And as Muhammad was getting more revelations, the religion spread. Now, at some stage, these initial revelations, the last part of the Quran, are very, very peaceful. When the Quran was put together by the Caliph Uthman, the order was changed because there was never anything written down. Muhammad was apparently illiterate. And there are now stories about there are different versions of the Quran, but initially, Uthman collected all the known sayings. The Quran was created by Uthman, who himself was assassinated. He was the third caliph after Muhammad died in 632 AD. Now, in Muhammad's time, there was a lot of war and conflict. Now, after Muhammad died, there was even more conflict. Abu Bakr, he became the first caliph after Muhammad died. For Islam, the main start of the religion begins in 617, the Hijrah, when Muhammad and his companions went into Medina. And from there, that's when they established themselves politically, but also they became quite warfaring by then. There were various groups at war with them. I mean, Surah 8, the 8th chapter of the Quran, is all about caravan raiding, which was, engaged against rival traders, who opposed Muhammad spreading his religion. So there's a large amount of warfare which has worked its way into the Quran. As I said, the violence, Omar, who was the second caliph after Abu Bakr, when he became the first caliph, for 17 months was engaged in what are called the apostasy wars or the Ridda wars, because many of the people who'd joined Islam as a favor to Muhammad, after Muhammad died in 632 AD, decided they didn't want to become part of Islam. And Abu Bakr, to consolidate Islam geopolitically, led wars, these wars called the Ridda or apostasy wars. And he was only in power for a few months after that, after the wars had finished, and he died. He was succeeded by Omar, who was a man who was described as having only laughed once and only cried once. He cried because he remembered in the time of Jahiliyyah, which was the time of ignorance before Muhammad in Arabia, it was a common practice to bury girl children, and he's said to have cried because he remembered the time when he had buried his daughter in the sand alive, and as he did so, she touched his beard to wipe the dust from it. He was quite a savage character, Omar, great strategist. But after he, he helped Islam to conquer more regions in that time. Then when he died, there was Uthman. Now, Uthman, he was the man who compiled the Quran. He didn't live very long. He was assassinated by a mob. He was torn to pieces. And then Ali, who was the fourth caliph, now he was actually son-in-law of Muhammad, and his wife Fatima was Muhammad's daughter, and he had two sons. Now, what happened with Ali, initially he was expected to be the first caliph. Muhammad had apparently said that he should be the first caliph. Now, according to Shiite tradition, there is the big, the Shia and Sunni shift is the main one going in Islam at the moment, the first fitna or conflict. Apparently, after Muhammad died, the issue of succession, who should lead the Muslims in their caliphate, it was contested by Omar and by Omar and Abu Bakr themselves together came to Ali's house, and apparently they broke into it, injuring Fatima, who then later died. And they, by force, apparently, had taken charge of the first and then the second caliphate. Uthman, who was the Umayyads, this tribe called the Umayyads, he took into power. And then after that, you had Ali came in, and he was himself assassinated in a mosque with a poisoned sword. Now, Ali had encouraged a group of people called the Kharijites. The Kharijites they're the people who were like the religious police in Saudi Arabia today. They believed that leaders should be pure to Islam, and they were incredibly violent, and it was one of the Kharijites who ended up killing Ali, and also a Kharijite killed his son. Now, Ali's sons were both killed. In the Battle of Karbala, the death of Hassan was the big turning point. Now, you may hear of what happened with the Shias. They, after the death of Ali and his grandson, his son, Muhammad's grandson, after that death, there was a huge rift. And this was when the Shia started going on their own paths. Now, they believed that Ali was the first of the caliphs. They ignored the first three. And the Iranian form of Shiism, they're regarded as Twelvers because they believe that the last caliph was the 12th in line from the succession from Ali. But there are other ones. There are the Fivers, who were the Zayidi in Yemen. They had a dispute after the killing of Zayd, killed by an Umayyad caliph. And they carried on their tradition. Now, that lasted until the 1960s. There was an imamate in Yemen, which was a continuous line from the line of Zayed. You have the Ismailis, they're Seveners. They came from a line after the seventh in line from the, this continuous line up to the last one. Now, in Iranian ideology, there's some very interesting ideas. There was a man called Ayatollah Mesbah Yazdi who believes in the 12th Imam coming back to earth. When in 2005, you had the accession of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Now, he only came to power because Mesbah Yazdi, Ahmadinejad had previously been only he graduated in traffic studies, and he was the mayor of Tehran. But he was a follower of Mesbah Yazdi. Now, Mesbah Yazdi was a member of a group called the Hojatiyeh Society, who believed that the bringing back of the 12th Imam, it will mean chaos. You can only bring him into the world through chaos, but once he comes back, the Mahdi, who is he's like the Messiah of Islam. He's mentioned in the Hadiths, which are writings which came about after Muhammad died. He would be coming back to earth. At the moment, he's in what's called grand occultation. He's hidden from the world. Some believe he lives down the bottom of a well in Qom, Qom, the holy city in Iran. And to bring him back, Ahmadinejad's rhetoric, as soon as he came into power, he was talking about burning Israel, sending Israel back to Europe. And he was also the person who was foremost in announcing that Iran was using PS2 nuclear centrifuges to take uranium hexafluoride and purify it for weapons-grade uranium and plutonium. This is the real problems with Iran politically and geopolitically. They've been allied with Putin in the past when you had various moves by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, trying to intervene from Iran, trying to get nuclear weapons. Now, these all came into being. The nuclear weapons threat. Iran has nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons. Now, that's all down to a Pakistani man called Abdul Qadir Khan, who had been working for a Dutch nuclear company. He was a person who got know-how, smuggled out centrifuge parts, etc., shared the information on how to make nuclear weapons, which is how Pyongyang was able to detonate its first nuclear weapon in 2006, how Pakistan in 1998, I believe it was, had its first nuclear weapon, and how Iran still hasn't got a nuclear weapon as far as we know, but it's well on the way to making it. Obama has played his last hands, hopefully. He's going to be gone within a few hours. But along the way, he has not helped. He has legitimized Iran to come. There were sanctions against it because of its nuclear weapons plans. Pakistan is a very unstable country. At one level, it pretends to be an ally of the West. It was receiving billions of dollars of money from the US from 2001 when Musharraf joined in the idea of the war on terror. But Musharraf and his successors haven't really abided by that. The fact that bin Laden in 2011, in May, when he was killed, had been living in Abbottabad, a town only 20 miles from Rawalpindi, which is where the main army of Pakistan is trained, where all its officer classes are all trained to be leaders of the army. Pakistan has been a very fickle member of this war on terror. I think, like the war on drugs, you can't really have a war on terror. What is happening this so-called clash of civilizations is very much to do with ideology. And that's what I'm really wanting to talk about this evening, is about what are these ideologies? What do they really mean? Where do they come from? So let's start with the clash of civilizations. Now, the first time it was known to be used popularly was a man called Bernard Lewis used it. Now, Bernard Lewis, he's a respected, I don't know how you'd call him, but he's an expert on Islamic history. He's a professor, extremely well respected by people from the Islamic world and from the West. He used in 1990 the term clash of civilizations, but in a slightly different context. In 1993, Samuel P. Huntington, now he wrote a hypothesis which he put forward in a lecture to the American Institute. And let's just read this out to you. It is my hypothesis that the fundamental source of conflict in this new world will not be primarily ideological or primarily economic. The great divisions among humankind and the dominating source of conflict will be cultural. Nation states will remain the most powerful actors in world affairs, but the principal conflicts of global politics will occur between nations and groups of different civilizations. The clash of civilizations will dominate global politics. The fault lines between civilizations will be the battle lines of the future. Now, he said that in 1993. Now, this is now several years on, but it seems that very much what he was saying has come into being. In Britain, we've had a sort of mild cultural rift going on ever since February the 14th, 1989, when you had Salman Rushdie had the fatwa was issued against him. Now, when this happened, there was a man called Kalam Siddiqui who was in Iran with the Ayatollah, and he encouraged the Ayatollah to actually make this fatwa. And in Britain, we had always assumed that Muslims were quite peaceful, got on with their own business. Whenever there were issues, there were programs on television for Asian groups, which would have Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims from Pakistan, from India, from Bangladesh, or East Pakistan as it was in the 60s. And they would be talking as one unit, or they'd be involved with black minorities as well in their talking. After 1989, February, everything changed. You had this notion of offence against Islam being punished by death as a threat. Now, you had translators were stabbed, people who translated the Salman Rushdie's book, the Satanic Verses. You had an Italian translator who was stabbed and seriously injured, and you had a Japanese translator who was killed outright in a lift in Japan. And we've had since then the issue of the cartoon crisis, which happened in 2006, and we've had other subsequent cases where offence against Islam has led to actual threats of killing, as in the case of Mohammed Bouyeri killing Theo van Gogh on November the 2nd, 2004. And that has been also followed by Charlie Hebdo, 2011, I believe it was. Their offices were burned down because they used to do cartoons of Mohammed. And then you had, after that, sadly 2 years ago, the killings of 12 members of staff, and then accompanied by that there were policemen killed and a policewoman, and all because of this offence against Islam being used as a weapon so that you can't even criticise Islam. Most religions will not like having their ideologies or their ideologues criticised, but there's been a major shift. Now, this started in 1989. You had people like Callum Siddiqui, who ran the Muslim Parliament in Britain. He was the founder of it. He was calling for the death of Salman Rushdie. You had people like Iqbal Sikrani, who later would become a head of the Muslim Council of Britain. He was saying that death would be too good for him. The head of the Bradford Council of Mosques, he was saying that he would willingly kill Salman Rushdie. If he wasn't to do it, he would get his children to do it. You had Cat Stevens or Yusuf Islam on television recorded saying that he wanted to see Salman Rushdie killed. This was something all going on in 1989, which had never been seen before. I mean, there were other factors which I want to go into. None of these things happen in isolation. You can't put one event down to say this is why it all happened. There are many other factors, but what began in Britain to be recognised was that there was suddenly a group who was seen to be peaceful. Suddenly, they were breaking the law, calling openly for murder. You know, incitement to murder is a crime. And yet, a year later, it's in Hansard. The then Director of Public Prosecution said there was not enough evidence, even though there was filmed evidence of people calling for his death. Demonstrations in Hyde Park where effigies of Salman Rushdie were being burned and books were being burned. It was quite extreme. We've moved on since then, and we have got almost used to the extremes which are going on. And it's like, if you can't criticize a culture, and I don't think Islam, and it's wrong if people get the impression, if they think that I'm saying that Islam is one homogeneous culture, it is not. Islam has its own divisions. An issue like offense against Islam, or offense against the founder of Islam, is something that can unite people. It's something where Saudi money has come into this. Now, really, how far back do we want to go? People mention in Britain a group called Quilliam. Now, Quilliam is named after the first convert to Islam who actually had his first mosque in Britain, in Liverpool. He was originally from the Isle of Man, a solicitor. He was debarred from being a solicitor later, but it was interesting that there was a play that was put on down to do with this idea of there are things that you can say and you can't say about one particular faith. And there was a play by a fellow Manxman who had his play on in London, and Quilliam got the Lord Chamberlain. Now, at that time, any play that was on in London, this is about 1880, any play that was put on in any part of London up until the 60s had to be vetted by the Lord Chamberlain. Now, the Lord Chamberlain was persuaded that this play offended Islam and offended the minority of Muslims in Britain, and the play was removed. Now, we've had similar cases about plays. Christopher Marlowe wrote a play called Tamburlaine. In this play, it involves a scene where Tamburlaine, based on Timur the Lame, who was born in Uzbekistan and the beginning of the 14th century and was a mass conqueror. In this play by Christopher Marlowe, Tamburlaine is shown burning copies of the Quran. Now, when this was going to be put on in the Barbican in either 2004 or 2005, that part of the play was censored out of fear. When you had, as I said, in 2nd of November 2004, Theo van Gogh, along with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, had done a program called Submission on television, in which verses from the Quran were shown projected onto the half-naked bodies of women. It was about the rights of women within Islam. Now, that offended people, and Mohammed Bouyeri, who was a Moroccan, a Salafist. Salafism is it's a very extreme, purist form of Islam. I mentioned Kharijites earlier on. Now, Kharijites, they used to kill people, assassinate, and they weren't related to the assassins. The assassins themselves were a Muslim group who were from the Ismaili sect, the Seven, as I mentioned earlier on. But this Mohammed Bouyeri decided that as Theo van Gogh had said what he said, it was outrageous, so he tracked him down. He was going to work on his bicycle in Amsterdam in the morning. Mohammed Bouyeri shot him, stabbed him, tried to decapitate him, and nearly succeeded in taking his head off, and then pinned to his chest a death list of all the other people who he felt had insulted Islam. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali was on there, Geert Wilders and other people were listed. But Theo van Gogh became the first famous martyr. You'd had Pim Fortuyn before that, had his own Fortuyn Party, which was quite an anti-Islamic party. Now, why anti-Islamic parties get set up? It seems that there is it not, or is it part of this clash of civilizations? Is it just a fact of when you have uncontrolled migration, you don't have enough time for people to gradually integrate? Is this what's helping to make chaos, make people start to want to atomize the European Union, for example? You know, we had the case of Angela Merkel invited 1 million migrants, you know, who are refugees from wars which have been helped along by the West, helped along by Russia. These people have been dispossessed, looking for safety, and Saudi Arabia, this country which claims to have, you know, the purest form of Islam, where you have Mecca, where every person, one of the 5 pillars of Islam is that once in your life you must go to Mecca. Mecca, as governed by the Saudi Arabians, is something which, if you're not allowed to go into the city if you're not Muslim. You're certainly not allowed to go around by the Kaaba. And Saudi Arabia has been funding many Salafist mosques. I will get onto Salafism in a minute, but Salafist mosques have been funded, and they have encouraged this radical, uncompromising literalism. It's like with Jewish history. Now, Muhammad did some awful things against the Midianites. If you look at Numbers 29:30, what he did to the Midianites was pretty horrible. But Judaism, with the Talmud and rabbinical commentaries, it meant that, you know, after about 100 AD, there were never any more stonings of anybody. It had, even though the original Old Testament has some quite fiery, awful things within it. As I said, Islam was founded during a time of conflict, and conflict after Muhammad's death became very strong, the so-called fitna. And this is something which, when you have conflict, you can divide people. It seems that there are little touchstones, things like the Israel-Palestine situation, the issue of writing books which apparently blaspheme against the Prophet, and you can suddenly get mass hysteria and a united force. And these conflicts are happening all over. They're happening in America. You had, I can't remember her surname, Molly. She was a cartoonist in Seattle. She was the person who did a cartoon that was satirizing this fact that people like South Park, you know, were being threatened with death by, there's a group called Revolution Muslim. And they were being threatened with death for having depicted Muhammad in one of their cartoons. They were depicting Mohammedan cartoons from the 90s, but nobody had complained until this issue of the big cartoon crisis. Now, that began September the 30th, 2005, when 12 cartoons of Muhammad were published in a Danish newspaper, Jyllands-Posten. Now, when this was actually put up first, there was a writer called Per Buyken who had been trying to get an illustrator for his book on Muhammad. He was wanting to write a book on Muhammad, and he wanted it to be illustrated because it's regarded as taboo to draw images of Muhammad. He was finding that no one would dare take it on. This was in 2005, and then finally, Jyllands-Posten, Carsten Just was the editor at that time, and he said that it was okay, and Fleming Rose. They said it was okay to run a competition for artists and illustrators to put their cartoons, or their images, their illustrations. Now, the most famous one was by Kurt Vestergaard, which depicted Muhammad's head with a turban, which had a little fuse attached to it. Now, this image, more than any of the others, inspired outrage. Now, there were two people from Abu Laban, he's now died, but he was head of a radical Salafist mosque in Denmark, in Copenhagen. Now, he, with a man called Al-Kriti, I think it was, no, I can't remember his facility. He, with a younger man, the two of them took these copies. Now, the publication of these things happened in September the 30th, 2005. Over that winter, they went to see people like in the Muslim world. Now, one of these people was the so-called spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, not the actual proper leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. And he was the one who made fatwas against Pokemon toys, who said that these were outrageous. Now, what they had done was they didn't just take the 12 cartoons. They'd added 3 more pictures, which had not been in the original cartoons, took them to various Muslim leaders, people connected with the Organization of Islamic Conference, whipped up a hysteria. So from September the 30th, when there had been hardly any international situation, by the time February came around in 2006, everything blew up. You had in Indonesia, you had people rioting, members of the Front Pembela Islam, the Islam's Defender Group, and they were attacking American consulates. You had in India, one imam said that he would give his weight in gold to anybody who would kill the cartoonists. Osama bin Laden issued a fatwa against the cartoonists. The massive wave of violence killed. There were people in northern Nigeria, in Kano, in the 12 northern states where Sharia law had been allowed to be introduced from 2000, 2001. Christian churches were killed, were destroyed, people were killed. More than 50 people died as a result of the violence. There were also in Israel, there were attacks upon Christian churches in the Palestinian regions. And you also had in Iraq, there was a bishop. He was decapitated, and a teenage boy from the Chaldean, which is a Catholic-related Christian faith, he was crucified. Then in 2006, in September the 13th, Pope Benedict XVI made this comment about, he was quoting from Manuel Paleologos II. Now, Manuel Paleologos II, he was the last but one Byzantine emperor. And he made a statement which said, "Show me what Islam has brought. It is nothing but war and conflict." When Pope Benedict made that comment, another wave of killings went mad. There was a group called Jamaat Dawa in Pakistan making death fatwas against him. People who were totally innocent. There was a woman called Sister Leonella in Somalia who worked at a hospital, Catholic nun, shot in the back. There were attacks in Turkey of Bible translators, had their throats cut. The enormity of the sort of backlash of any perceived criticism, creating this hysteria. I mean, it happened as well in Libya after a man called Terry Jones, who has a church of only 50 people. He publicly burned a Quran and then showed this on YouTube. And as a result, you had 8 people were killed in Afghanistan. And then later you had in Libya, there was, because of another perceived conflict, you had the ambassador was killed there. We have a real difficulty in being able to do anything which might offend the more radical elements of Islam. And the people who are being hit and killed in this are civilians. It's not Kurt Vestergaard, who did the image of Muhammad with a turban, his home was attacked. His home was attacked when he had with him his 6-year-old granddaughter. Fortunately, he had a safe room. He was able to go into this safe room. And the killer, or the potential killer, who had an axe, who had broken into his home with this axe, wanted to kill him, was shot by police. He survived, but he was shot by police before he could actually do what he'd intended to do. We're living in very, very dangerous times. Now, this has been in peacetime. This was before these massive shifts in the last year or so. And this is where cultures have rubbed up against each other and they have not gone on well. Now, I said I was going to explain Salafism. Now, people talk about Islamism, Islamists. I don't want to say all Muslims are Islamists because they're not. I mean, if all Muslims were Islamists, we'd be in total, it wouldn't even be civil war. It would be just, it wouldn't happen. We'd all be enslaved or killing people. The Salafist idea is going back to this idea of the Karajites, of this purism. Hello, I hear bounces and noises.
Sorry, I was just moving my mic around. Sorry, carry on.
That's okay, yeah. Well, Salafism is something that it's been going for ages, but it's never really been, there have been various sects of Islam. Within Sunniism, some have been more extreme than others. Now, Wahhabism is the religion of Saudi Arabia. Now, this isn't the only form of Salafism, but it's a very important one. Now, Wahhab, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, he lived in the 18th century. Now, he came to power in the middle of the 18th century. He made his own jihad against, at that time, Arabia was under the rule of the Ottomans, had been so since about 1517. And when Wahhab, with his idea of purism, decided that people were worshipping at a shrine of a Sufi saint. Now, Sufism, terminology is always, dealing with Islam, you have to use the right terms so that you don't alienate, law-abiding, decent Muslims by just generalizing. This is something we cannot do and have a safe, proper discussion. But Sufism, just to sort of briefly explain what it is, it's from the idea of tawassuf, the idea that you can, as an individual, make contact with God. The whirling dervishes, when they dance, they whirl around, they have one hand up in the air and they whirl. The one hand is symbolic of reaching to be a conduit between the human being and God. Now, Sufism, it's regarded by most people as a very very peaceful interpretation of Islam. That's not always true. Tamerlane, who went out and slaughtered loads of people, what he used to do, Tamerlane, when he went out on his conquests, would leave pyramids of rotting, decapitated skulls outside of the cities that he had conquered as a warning to others. Now, Tamerlane was a Sufi. So, but for the most part, Sufism is regarded as peaceful. But this Sufi tradition often involves revering people who were wise people. Like we have in Christianity, there are saints. Sufis have saints. They don't mean that they're, incorporeal beings. Some people have venerated their shrines. These shrines have been attacked. There are Sufi, when you had in Somalia, there were Sufi tombs smashed to pieces by followers of Al-Qaeda. And similarly, in about 1750 or so, in Arabia, as it was then, Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, who was the founder of Wahhabism, the Saudi national religion, he launched his own jihad against a local town near him in the Hijaz, which had a Sufi shrine. And people used to go there and they used to ask for blessings and they used to lay offerings. Because of that, he accused them of what is called shirk, polytheism. Now, when this happened, this was the first sort of Wahhabism making its mark on the world. He had been driven out from Mecca and Medina. He became, he was taken in by the House of Saud, who at that time just owned a few groves in the Hijaz in Arabia. And after he died at I think 1790 or so, the family, the House of Saud, continued with his ideology. Now, his ideology is that you cannot worship anything other than Allah. Now, that's why every Saudi leader, the Sauds took over Arabia. Every leader, every king who dies in Arabia is always buried in an unmarked grave in the desert, because they believe that if you have a gravestone, it is so-called shirk. It is potentially an object of worship. Now, there have even been moves within Saudi Arabia recently. There have been talk about trying to bomb the hill in which this Al-Nur cave, where Muhammad first got his revelations. There's been talk by the Wahhabis of trying to bomb it so it doesn't become, as it has become, a place of pilgrimage. To them, the only place of pilgrimage is Mecca and Medina. Mecca, where you go and you walk, you perambulate around the Kaaba and kiss the Kaaba. This stone, apparently a meteorite, which is housed within this cubic shrine, which used to be a pagan shrine before then, which had 365 gods inside it, all of which were removed later. Now, when Wahhabism came into being, its ideology, there's only one book that survives that Wahhab had written. It's called the Kitab al-Tawhid, which means the book of monotheism. Tawhid is monotheism. Now, when this started, he died pretty soon afterwards, but his followers, who were protected by the House of Saud, in 1802 and 1803, not only had they taken over Medina, they'd also taken over Mecca. Now, these holy places are, you would have thought that a holy place is holy. The Wahhabists even ransacked the tomb of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. This was in 1802. Took out of it every single bit of gold, every offering that was buried with the body, took it all out. It was stripped bare. There is just remained they allowed to remain was just the body of Muhammad himself. Now, this is quite a radical departure from what you expect from reverence. It's because this book, Kitab al-Tawhid by Wahhab, says that anything that can become objects of reverence, they are polytheism, shirk, which is against monotheism, Tawhid, which is worship of Allah and Allah alone. Now, this was a clash of civilizations within Arabia going on. This was something that it took them quite a while for the Ottomans to actually control this, but in 1802, 1803, that was when the first Saudi Arabia began. The Saudi Arabia we have now didn't come into being until 1932, when Abdul Aziz ibn Saud took power, and then he became the head of the current Saudi Arabia, named after the House of Saud. Now, the views of Wahhab were taken from a man called Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah lived in Damascus. He was somebody who he'd been imprisoned twice himself for falling foul of what was permissible. He was accused of anthropomorphizing God by talking about the foot of God. So he was jailed on 2 occasions. He did a lot of writing. Now, of itself, most of his writing isn't that bad. It isn't that horrific. I have an Australian Muslim friend who he's a Quran only person. He's given me some quite interesting insights into the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah. But the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah are regarded as influential, also inspirational towards people like Abdullah Azam and Anwar al-Awlaki, who wrote books in defense of violent jihad. Now, jihad it means struggle, but it can also mean war. And there's one type of jihad fi sabilillah, jihad on the path of Allah is the one which is regarded as, holy war, which you must engage in. Normally, the idea of holy war is only when you are being attacked. It's defensive. People like Abdullah Azam, who was the person who inspired Osama bin Laden. He was originally from Pakistan, studied in Saudi Arabia. And then in Afghanistan, this is when Wahhabism, from 1979 onwards, that's when many Muslims ended up in Afghanistan. I'll deal with that in a minute, but how Salafism formed. Now, when you had Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab, he died, but his successors had taken over Mecca and Medina. Now, there was a man, Syed Ahmed Rai Bareli, from a town in India. In 1811, he went to Arabia. Now, he went to Arabia, he was fascinated by what had gone on. He was fascinated by the views of Wahhabism. He went back to India. Now, he was a Sufi. He set up what was called the Naqshbandi revivalist movement. The Naqshbandi revivalist movement in India, in parts of what's now Pakistan, really. But when that took off, its main jihad was to kill Sikhs. And it wasn't until 1831, and the Sikhs murdered him, that his reign of terror ended. But his views remained. They were very influential. In 1857, beginning of the real Raj, the Sikhs, who had been pretty put upon by the remnants of the Mughal dynasties and so on, they had sided with the British. They got their own back. But the views of Syed Ahmed Rai Bareli, they were taken on by a man called Nanautvi, who set up in 1857 in a place called Deoband in India, northern India. He set up a seminary, the so-called Darul Uloom, which is the House of Knowledge. Now here, the ideas of Wahhab, which originated in Saudi Arabia, as it is now known Saudi Arabia, were taken on board. They survived through Nanautvi, and Deobandism is a type of ideology. All of the Afghan Taliban were Deobandi. A lot of them were not even from Afghanistan, who set up the first, rulings of the Taliban. And they had been, most of them had come, the first leaders of the Taliban had come from the Haqqaniya Mosque, which is actually on the Pakistani side of the border. And Wahhabism and Deobandism have many things in common. The idea that girls shouldn't be educated after the age of 8, which is why you've had in Afghanistan some awful, horrific things happening, people being torn apart with vehicles, with chains, because they were teaching girls. And this idea of the Wahhabism becoming like Deobandism, Salafism thrives on the ideologies of groups like the Deobandi. Now, the largest Islamic Sunni seminary in the world is at Al-Azhar University in Egypt, but the Deobandi seminary is the second largest, incredibly influential. There was a statement in 2009 by the police, published in the Sunday Times. They were quoting a police report which stated that almost a half of the 1,300 mosques in the United Kingdom were all run on Deobandi principles. Now, Deobandism is not necessarily peaceful. It's one of those things that, it has proponents who say it's peaceful, but as soon as, like Malala Yousafzai, when she was shot in the head by Taliban members, it isn't that peaceful. She went to Britain. The Birmingham Central Mosque is run on Deobandi lines. There was a man called Riyad ul-Haq who used to be in charge there as, giving sermons. He's banned from Canada because of his extreme views. He was educated at the Deobandi Darul Uloom in Bury in Britain. And there were people got killed one person got killed, and there were massive conflicts within the mosque community when he chose to take for a second wife the wife of one of the staff at the mosque. And as a result, there were factions, got to fighting each other, and one man was killed. Riyad ul-Haq, his view is, he's openly stated that, quoting from the Quran, from the 5th surah, that you shall not take Christians or Jews for friends. Now, his form of Deobandism has not been helpful at all. But winding the clock back to what happened in Arabia with the rise of the Wahhabis to become the House of Saud. Now, the Abdul Aziz ibn Saud was helped by the British. He was helped by the father of one of these Cambridge spies. Now, Sinjan, better get the name right. But he basically, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, got a virtual army together. Now, this army of people, he called them the Ikhwan, which meant brotherhood. They helped to spread his power and his influence. They took over Mecca. This is the third time that members of the Saud family had taken over Mecca. Now, in 1925, there was a place called the Baqi Cemetery, which was in Mecca, in Medina, sorry, and the Baqi cemetery had the graves of numerous companions of Muhammad who had moved when the Hijrah happened and everybody moved to Medina. They had been the first companions of Muhammad. Now, their tombs had become shrines. And what happened was that the Wahhabists, led by Abdulaziz ibn Saud, they took over and destroyed all of the headstones, every shrine that was there. So there are now just little plot numbers and names, for where people would be buried there, just little posts left. And that is regarded by Shia as well as a great offense against the Shia community, because most of their, the tomb of Ali and people, removed all of the headstones and any sort of reverence. It just it's devalued the importance. The Shia, they felt that they've suffered a great injustice, and I think their ideology is all about justice and trying to, restore justice. But what happened when it was in the 20s, there was a thing called the Mahamal. Now, the Mahamal was a tradition of Egypt sending to Arabia, the black curtains with gold embroidery on them, which were to be put over the Kaaba, this cubic shrine in the center of Mecca. Every year, you would have this curtains would be taken in a special caravan with loads of camels, arrive in Arabia, and get to Mecca. Trumpets would be sounded, and then the cloths would be unwrapped, and then the old cloths covering the Kaaba would be taken down, and the new ones would be put over it. Now, when this happened in the 1920s, when the Mahamal arrived, I think it was 1926 or 7, it was just after the Baqi cemetery incident anyway, the trumpets were sounded within earshot of Mecca. As a result, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud's men went crazy with their guns. Camels were killed, people were killed, and this was Winston Churchill in Parliament discussed this incident and discussed the savagery of what Wahhabism had become. Whether it originally was like that, I think it must have been, considering Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab had been quite young when he launched his crusade against Sufi shrines within Arabia. And this sort of major conflicts between moderate Islam, or fairly moderate Islam, and fundamentalist Islam, they've been going on for quite a long time. You've had various dynasties, you've had caliphates. The Ottomans, they weren't originally from the region. The Ottomans, they really came into power. 1517, they conquered Egypt and Arabia. And shortly after 1520, they conquered Iran, and they became a caliphate. Now, the Ottomans before that, they only started to arrive in Turkey from Asia, their origin, around about 1000. Now, battles which had been fought during that time, from the first arrivals of the Ottomans till eventually about 1350, they established themselves in Bursa, which is near Istanbul. And eventually they grew to be powerful. And they continued. The Ottoman Caliphate, the leader of the Ottomans, the king, his sons would be in power, or one of his sons. Sometimes, in the case of Mehmed III, I believe it was, there were 19 brothers who all had to be strangled by one brother to actually ascend the throne in Topkapi, where they had the palace. And it finally ended, the last, you had the rule of the Young Turks in 1909, But the Ottoman Caliphate officially ended in the 1920s when Turkey began in 1923, March the 3rd, 1924. I mean, that's when officially the Caliphate ended. By that time, it was a shadow of its former self. Round about 1900, the last of the power of the Ottoman Caliphate had gone. And in that time, in Egypt, there were various groups in the end of the 19th century who were trying to work to take control of the Muslim world. They were fed up with being ruled by non-Arabs. And various groups were publishing articles and magazines. And out of these, eventually, you had the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1927 by Hassan al-Banna and 5 other teachers. He was a teacher. And the Muslim Brotherhood has become the so-called, nowadays it's the idea of the political Islam. Islam with a friendly face that can be trusted, even though it's had some horrific things in its past. The Wahhabism that goes on in Saudi Arabia is one form of, it's not even Islamism, it's Salafism. That is just as informative for the terrorists who go and kill people in Nice or in Paris or in Belgian airports. It informs that form of radical, violent ISIS-style jihad. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is this Islamism. So Salafism is fundamentalist religious Islam, which takes as its main import for its ideas, it takes in the hadiths, but only certain ones, and the Quran. And it has quite strict principles based on religion and religion only. The principles of the suit and tie Islamists of the Muslim Brotherhood, they have managed to infiltrate various groups. Now, in Britain, Muslim Council of Britain was founded in 1997. It was founded at the same time as the Muslim Association in Britain by a man called Kemal el-Helbawi. Kemal el-Helbawi, he, in 1963, had been involved with, in Arabia, Saudi Arabia, had been forming the Muslim World League. Now, he co-founded both the Muslim Association of Britain and the Muslim Council of Britain in 1997, around about the same time as Tony Blair took power. Now, when this happened, we started to have a lobbying group. And a lot of the groups of people who had suddenly gone from being invisible to being recognized because of the Salman Rushdie affair, they had a group they could go to. Oh, I can hear voices. Is that something going on there?
Oh, it's my son playing. Sorry, I can't shut him up.
There was sort of people fighting in the street outside. Sorry.
It's you. It's what you're saying. They're fighting now, waiting to attack you after. I have a few questions coming up in the chat room. So when you want to take a break in about 15 minutes, then we can go through them.
Okay, well, I mean, we can go through them now if you want.
Oh, carry on, because I was enjoying what you were saying.
Okay, all right. Well, this Muslim Council of Britain was formed and we had a lobbying group. Now, this is where the Islamists have become quite important in terms of lobbying and changing laws. Now, they're very, very influential in both Britain and America. You've got various groups in America who, the Muslim Public MPAC, and Muslim Public Affairs Committee, not the British one, that's slightly different, but the one in America, founded by Muslim Brotherhood members, the Al-Hijra Mosque, which is where Anwar al-Awlaki had been the imam, the one who he ended up becoming the leader of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And two of the 9/11 attackers had also been worshipping at the Dar al-Hijra Mosque, which is in Falls Church, Virginia. As I said, founded by Muslim Brotherhood members. Now, we're coming at the moment up to, my God, it sounds like someone being strangled.
Very topical, isn't it, for what we're discussing?
Well, I don't know. You see, the thing is, coming up, we've got this new era of American presidency, which is a whole departure. I mean, Obama had his faults, and Trump is going to have very different faults. But they are as alike as chalk and cheese, especially on issues of foreign policy. But with Obama, I mean, he has been, right from the start, he had a lot of advisors who were from groups associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, when he came to power, which was in, was it 2007 or 2008? But in 2007, there was a document that was published originally by the Nixon Foundation. It was also published in Foreign Affairs, which influenced Obama's foreign policy. Because this is really what I really want to discuss, was this idea of cultural clashes of civilization. Now, Obama, before he became head of the largest power in the West, had said in August 2007 that he would deal with, when he was trying to get to be the candidate, he said that he would deal with Al-Qaeda in Pakistan with bombing. He was quite harsh, about his policies. I think he was slightly disabled when he came into power and he'd been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that slightly tied his arms. He couldn't portray his mission of trying to be tough on terrorism. Now, what he was saying about being this person to introduce bombing, he was talking about drones. One of his first actions when he became president was to introduce a man called Richard C. Holbrooke to be his special ambassador or special envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now, the importance of Richard C. Holbrooke, who's now dead, is that he had started up as the head person involved in the Bosnian conflict. Now, you had the war had gone on in Bosnia. You had Alija Izetbegovic, who refused to step down. They had a rotating presidency. He declared a state of emergency. And in 1992, the Bosnian war came to an end. But they'd had a lot of people had been pushed out from Afghanistan. People like bin Laden's friends, even bin Laden himself had been, according to Eve Ann Prentice, who used to work for the Sunday Times, she mentioned about she was waiting to see Alija Izetbegovic, and Osama bin Laden had come out from his office. Now, what had happened in Bosnia, you had three groups, and the way that Richard C. Holbrooke got a peace, the Dayton Accords, as they were called, he managed to secure a peace in 1992 because he had been the first person to use drones. Drones had only ever been used in 1992 for the very first time when Richard C. Holbrooke was having these things operated from hangars within Bosnia. And the groups, the various three groups, the Muslims and the Serbs, and I've forgotten the other one, these groups were brought to the negotiating table because they were threatened with being bombed by robots from the air. Hellfire missiles fired by remote-controlled drones. Now, this is what Obama meant. So when he brought in Richard C. Holbrooke to be his envoy for Afghanistan and Pakistan, suddenly you had a rise. Now, you had Al-Khattab, who was Al-Qaeda's poison specialist. He'd been killed in 2005 at the end of it in Miran Shah in Waziristan, which is in what's called the FATA, Federally Administered Tribal Areas. These are borderland regions. You've got a thing called the Durand Line, which divides Afghanistan and Pakistan. And you've got various agencies, which are sort of semi-autonomous tribal regions. Waziristan is one of the main ones where people like Al-Qaeda's second in command, Ayman al-Zawahiri, he was having meetings regularly in Waziristan. And Richard C. Holbrooke increased. Under Bush, there had been several of these targeted killings. Now, if you have a drone with a Hellfire missile and you shoot it at a village where you know one house is going to be having a meeting, an awful lot of collateral damage happens, an awful lot of civilians, innocent people get killed. And unfortunately, this is what has been made things worse under Obama's thing. Now, I said about this thing of in 2007 and a publication, there was a publication written by two people, Leakin and Brooke. Now, it was called the Moderate Muslim Brotherhood. This was the document which was to influence the Democrat Party before Obama was even chosen. It was to influence their course of action. Now, the thesis of this rather ridiculous document, is, in my opinion, called the Moderate Muslim Brotherhood, was there are two types of Islamists. There are the Islamists who go around bombing people to get their way, and there are the Islamists who wear suit and ties and pretend to be moderate. Therefore, if America was to give its influence to the Islamists who wear suit and ties, i.e. the Muslim Brotherhood, founded originally in 1927 or 8 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, which initially was working as they used to have soccer groups for young kids. It developed when they had the establishment of Israel. By then it was very strong, and they were bombing Jewish and Christian businesses in Egypt. And then they sent its special operations unit, sent 10,000 fighters from Egypt to go and fight against the Israelis. He was killed. Hassan al-Banna was killed in 1949 in a market in Egypt. But what happened with the Muslim Brotherhood, they have continued to influence. Now, this notion of because they have suits and ties and they don't practice terrorism has been a huge misleading red herring. Because what's happening with ISIS, these people don't come from people who pretend to be government advisors like the Muslim Council of Britain, like CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, again, another Muslim Brotherhood run organization. People who have gone to become real terrorists have not had anything really to do with this suit and tie Islam. Now, the Moderate Muslim Brotherhood thesis by Leakin and Brooke, it postulated that if you've got these two types of Islamists, you've got the ones who bomb people and the ones who don't. It was hypothesizing that if you gave more consideration and respect to the suits and tie people, then the disaffected Muslims who may have joined Al-Qaeda would instead put their support behind the Muslim Brotherhood. Catastrophic. It didn't work. ISIS has erupted. The Muslim Brotherhood. You had Mubarak in Egypt. He was thrown under the bus by Obama, and Morsi came into power. Muslim Brotherhood members. The Muslim Brotherhood were really terrible in Egypt. They didn't do anything for the people. Mubarak may have presided over a country where slums and youth unemployment and poverty was rampant. But the Muslim Brotherhood did nothing for the people in Egypt. And the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt itself, where it was founded, has now become quite decimated. It's become almost an irrelevance. We've got the real danger in the world at the moment is radical Salafism, which was never even mentioned in this moderate Muslim Brotherhood document. But in April 2007, within a few days of each other, you had Nancy Pelosi going around a Syrian market wearing a hijab headscarf. She'd been talking to Bashar al-Assad, the head of the Syrian regime, about trying to do deals with him. He had himself, his father, in 1980, the town of Hama. About 10,000 people were killed by his father because they were suspected of being the Muslim Brotherhood. But Nancy Pelosi thought that, she could make her one-woman mission to try and soften his views towards the Muslim Brotherhood, and you allow them and we won't be having so much problems. It came to nothing. I wrote a comment on her Facebook page about when they were having the Arab Spring and there was massive fighting going on, and I was saying, don't you think it's time that Nancy Pelosi did another peace mission out in Syria? And I got my comment deleted for some strange reason. But
I've got someone in the chat box. Saying, excuse me, the questions are coming up. So I just thought, as we're coming to the last half hour, we just.
It's good for an hour and a half to be able to not stop talking.
I know. Well done. Thank you, Adrian. It was very interesting. So I just thought I'd go over some of these. Somebody says, tell your guests that they are not in the same scale as Jewish lobby groups like AIPAC.
Right, okay, well, that's just whataboutery. That isn't what I'm discussing. Well, I'm not going to even bother answering that, sorry.
Okay, I don't know what it means, but...
well, I'm sure who AIPC or whatever are, you know what I mean? But this idea of the Jewish lobby, for goodness sake, what is the Jewish lobby? Is that person got a problem with anti-Semitism, or is it Israel? And all too often nowadays, so much anti-Israel lecturing and pontificating is just basically naked anti-Semitism. So I don't know. I mean, you have people like Peter Oborn has been, he used to be writing for used to edit the Daily Mail news site. Very good writer on politics. Excellent writer on politics. He got nobbled at some stage when he started defending Muslim Brotherhood activities and criticizing BICOM and other so-called Israeli lobby groups. Now, I just think that the Israeli lobby is just some manufactured paranoia that's been originally engendered by Islamists, like the morons who run the BDS, the BDS group, who I really don't, people like Omar Barghouti, and then the Electronic Intifada with Ali.
Sorry, what does BDS mean?
It's about divestment and sanctions. I can't remember what the B stands for, but it's a group that was set up by someone who wasn't even from the so-called Palestine, which tries to get legitimate Israel delegitimized, basically. The Muslim Brotherhood has been well behind that. The Union of Good, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was behind the Union of Good. When you had in 2010, the Mahdi Marmara went to try and break sanctions on Israel, and you had Israeli sort of people tried to intercept. There was a United Nations blockade, Navy blockade against the region. And you ended up with, when they tried to board the Mahdi Marmara ship, there was a flotilla, about 3 ships. The Rachel Corrie was one, the Mahdi Marmara was another. And this was run by Muslim Brotherhood members. There was a Turkish charity who funded it, but it was organized by mainly Muslim Brotherhood members. And you had Egyptian customs officials, soldiers being killed. And it was another case where martyrdom then gets trumpeted. Oh, it's terrible. But the BDS movement and the electronic intifada, as I said, the head of the electronic intifada is a man called Ali Abu Nima. He works with Omar Barghouti, and they produce propaganda. All the time it's about the Palestinians being victimized. The Palestinian citizens are being victimized, but by their own governments. Hamas is taking all of the money which is intended for making the lives of these people on the Gaza Strip more bearable, to help them have jobs. But no, it doesn't go to them. It goes to them having flash cars. And it's always been that way. When you had Yasser Arafat was a billionaire from Western funding aimed to give to the people. The people in Palestine are oppressed. But it isn't Israel that's doing the oppression, it's their own leaders.
He's saying, same person here, there's a few others. Sorry. How am I racist for talking about APEC and the power of APEC?
APEC or?
Sorry, AIPAC?
Right, I really don't even know who the AIP. I mean, it's just another name. AIPIC. The American is. This is why I'm not aware of it, because it's an American thing. So I'm, based in Britain, as you can hear by my voice. Right. Well, I'm not quite sure where your AIPAC organization fits in. America's pro-Israel lobby. Well, what is wrong with having a pro-Israel lobby? What is this person's complaints against them? What can he actually level at them as accusations? What have they done that any other country has not done?
He says here, is Israel did 9/11?
Oh, bollocks. I'm sorry. Tell him to piss off. I'm not dealing with that shit. No, I'm sorry. That is just conspiracy theory nonsense, and I will not waste my time. I've spent an hour and a half trying to talk sense and facts without silly bias or imaginary wank fantasies about nasty, evil, hook-nosed Jews or nasty Muslims. I've tried to be fair and reasonable in my time, and my time is being wasted by this muppet in your chat room. You can piss off. I'm sorry. Is that a bit strong for your listeners?
No, it's okay.
But I don't tolerate that sort of paranoia nonsense. 9/11, there is ample evidence from the Hamburg group, the 19 Saudi individuals who carried out the bombings and those, the plane attacks, and the others who were going to be manning the planes if one didn't make the cut. It is all absolutely 100% down to Islamism, Islamism, Salafism. It is not down to Israel.
He said, sorry, there's a lady now, Olive. She wants to ask, America, Russia and Germany is in agreement to wipe out ISIS. We are asking, is England and UK in agreement?
I think they are in agreement. I just think that ISIS it's like a hydra. It has been something that's been allowed to come into being because for a long time now, Britain has had a very lax approach. I mean, Britain, like all other European countries, but Britain in particular. I mean, we had the Finsbury Park Mosque was taken over by Abu Hamza. He's the man who is now in prison in America. He's a person who's been involved in organizing terrorism. And we knew about it in Britain because we had his mobile phone when people in Yemen were taken hostage. Abu Hamza had been negotiating with the hostage takers. 16 people were killed, 4 Britons involved in those deaths as well, when the Yemeni authorities tried to release the hostages. Now, Abu Hamza also tried to set up an American training camp in Dog Cry Ranch near Bly in Oregon. Now, he said that he had lost his 2 hands and one of his eyes while he was in Bosnia helping to clear mines. What had actually happened, he was in the Derunta training camp, the Al-Qaeda training camp on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, having a lesson in how to make explosives. And his bowl of explosives, bubble and smoke, he ran out from where he was having this training, and the bowl of explosives blew up, took both of his hands off and one of his eyes. He is now finally deported, but he was allowed to preach openly, calling for the deaths of people. He was finally, in February 2007, convicted of solicitation to murder, was the actual thing that he was convicted of. But from 2003 onwards, he had people plotting destruction and terrorism elsewhere. One of the people who carried out the Beslan killings, when all those school children were killed, 180 school children plus adults on top, September the 1st, 2004, one of the main planners for that, who took part in this massacre of children, was at the Finsbury Park Mosque, and the police were monitoring him, but they did nothing to stop these terrorist training camps, setting up these terrorist activities, all influenced from inside the mosque. It was, there was the time when DC Oaks was stabbed to death by a killer who had been given refuge inside the Finsbury Park Mosque, who'd used the mosque photocopier to download recipes for making not only ricin but botulinum toxins. He had planned to go to Heathrow Airport, where people have handrails, to put botulinum toxin made from dog feces onto these handles so people would get botulism. When he was in Manchester, he fled from the Finsbury Park Mosque, where he'd slept overnight. He went up to Manchester, and then DC Oaks tried to arrest him because he was making ricin from the castor oil plant. Ricin's extremely toxic. He was basically, this man was allowed to do that. When they finally took over the Finsbury Park Mosque, a group called the Muslim Safety Committee with the Metropolitan Police put in, it was again another Muslim Brotherhood group, to run the mosque after Abu Hamza was removed. But when they did the raid to get rid of Abu Hamza, they found there were chemical protection suits and all sorts of other things. There were starter guns, things hidden in the roof of the mosque. It was a very bad move to have allowed this mosque to be monitored and watched, because preaching was going on there, which helped it inflame people to go out and create these things. So how America, Russia, and Germany, how they react, I'm not really too sure about how they're going to deal with it. Can you repeat that question again? I got done digressing again. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. They just wondered, was the UK behind the American intention to wipe out ISIS?
Yes, but I don't think you can wipe it out. You can wipe out its power structures. You can wipe out its camps. You can, I mean, what they have done with the Yazidi women, turning them into slaves, it's appalling. But I think that what has gone on for too long, we have allowed in Europe, I don't know about with Russia, but in Europe in particular, we have had mosques which have preached terrorism. I mean, in Belgium, you know, you have had the Assabil Mosque. Now that has, there was a man called Abachi, like he has, since he's had his arm blown off in Syria, but the mosque at this Assabil group, based in Molenbeek in Belgium, you know, where they had the recent terrorists who fled to after Paris attacks. Now the Assabil Mosque, I don't know if you remember, there was a case of the Northern Alliance on the 9th of September when you had 9/11. 2 days before that, on the 7th of September, no, sorry, it was just 2 or 3 days before 9/11, the head of the Northern Alliance was being interviewed. Two people who'd been to the Belgian mosque, who ended up going to, they pretended to be news reporters. They had a cameraman and a sound engineer, and they went to interview the head of the Northern Alliance, and the camera was actually a bomb, and they blew themselves up and the head of the Northern Alliance, who were the non-Al-Qaeda, non-Taliban, you know, groups in Afghanistan. So, but that mosque was never closed down. And that mosque had had various people when ISIS, when it originally were groups like the Al-Nusra Front, before they became ISIS, you had people going from that mosque out to Syria to become part of ISIS. And I think this is something that's been going on. There have been German mosques, you know, the Hamburg Mosque, the Jama Mosque, which was closed down, where you had members of the so-called Hamburg group. 2 of the 9/11 bombers were there. After that, you had various people sent off by, there was a group called the GSBPC, the Salafist group for preaching and combat. They used to have mosques in Germany and Spain on the Costa del Sol, where people would be encouraged to go off to fight initially in Afghanistan and Iraq against Western forces. Those same people, you know, fighting. Before ISIS came into being, there has been a jihad, there's been a pipeline, you know. There was a group in Britain called Al-Mujahirun. Now, people like Anjem Choudhury, he's head of that. Now, in February the 3rd, 2006, Choudhury organised this demonstration in Trafalgar Square against the cartoons, where you had people carrying placards saying behead those who insult Islam and everything. Now, he wasn't convicted of anything other than organising an illegal demonstration, but his followers, Adam Bawali and you know, the 2 people who hacked at Lee Rigby's head, were his followers. These groups have been going on changing their names. They've been, you know, the Saviour Sect, Al-Ghuraba, they've called themselves, Islam for UK. It's all based on Al-Mujahirun, the same group. And these are the people still sending people out to ISIS. You know, it's very difficult to, how can you stop? Once you have people who were radicalized, and they've been allowed to be radicalized and to radicalize others for decades. Now, Al-Mujahirun, that was initially a name given to the people when they went to Medina. Al-Mujahirun was set up initially by Omar Bakri Muhammad. Omar Bakri Muhammad, born in Syria, gone to Saudi Arabia. He set up a group there called Al-Mujahirun, which was actually a front group for Hizb ut-Tahrir. came to Britain. He helped to set up the British branch of Hizb ut-Tahrir, an international Islamist group. Hizb ut-Tahrir, founded in 1953 in Jerusalem by a former Ottoman judge, with jurisprudence in Islam. Hizb ut-Tahrir has had organizations all over the place. In Indonesia, it's exceedingly violent. In Denmark, the leader is a total anti-Semite who's been jailed on numerous times, both for anti-Semitism and also for inciting people to fight their own government. He set up al-Mujahiroon when he came to Britain. He was a computer programmer. Now, he arrived in Britain around about 1983. Shortly after that, with another man, he's founded Hizb ut-Tahrir. In 1996, he was kicked out from Hizb ut-Tahrir because he was regarded as too extreme. He set up al-Mujahiroon, which was then operating on campuses across Britain, student union campuses. Muslim girls who didn't wear hijabs would be beaten up and threatened until they wore hijabs. They infiltrated students' unions. They used to put posters up in student union common rooms saying, "Behead homosexuals." Now, his second in command was Anjem Choudary. Anjem Choudary was trained as a lawyer. He always avoided the extremes so that he is now in jail, but he avoided going to jail. But he has helped to radicalize a whole generation of people. I mean, the first killing in Britain happened in Newham College in 1997 when an African student was killed by al-Mujahiroon supporters 3 days after Omar Bakri Mohammed had given a lecture there. And it was his followers from initially Hizb ut-Tahrir, which became al-Mujahiroon, had been involved in the killing of this African student because he had laughed when they tried to give him a leaflet. This was
is Andrew Chowdhury still in prison?
Yes.
Which prison is he in?
Not sure which one, but he's going to be in there for a few more months.
What charge is that?
I think it's about supporting terrorism. We've had 2 laws on terrorism, but I mean, it wasn't glorifying terrorism. It was certainly about, it was for terrorist offences, but not for actually carrying out any terrorist actions, but for inciting and...
Is he based in Birmingham or London?
London.
Right.
Just London.
Right. Somebody is asking here, please ask your guest, does he think the Mayor of London being a Muslim is a problem for the English people?
Not at all. I don't agree with him. I mean, he was one of the people who was listed in the expenses scandal of MPs taking money when they, from the taxpayer for things they shouldn't have been taking. But apart from that, sadly, no, he's fine. I mean, he may be not very good as a mayor, but then again, so the same could have been said for Boris Johnson before him. His being a Muslim is not a problem. And for most people who are Muslim, they aren't a problem. The only Muslims who are really a problem are the ones who believe that their religion entitles them, or they have a vision of their religion of taking over. 90%, more than 90% of Muslims are totally fine in positions of authority and power.
So is it kind of like a war between the Jewish peoples and the Muslims, or Muslims and Christian?
But the issue of the Jewish people, the issue of Israel, there was a man called Yusuf al-Nada, a Muslim Brotherhood member. He fled after Hassan al-Banna was killed in Egypt in 1949. A whole load of Muslim Brotherhood members fled. Now, Yusuf al-Nada went to Switzerland. Now, after 9/11, he had set up the Al-Taqwa Bank, the first Muslim Brotherhood bank. In 2001, after the 9/11 incident, in November of that year, his home was raided. He lived in Campione, which is near Lake Geneva, between Italy and Switzerland. Now, in his home, there was a document was found, and it was written by the grandson of, the grandson of Hassan, the son-in-law of Hassan al-Banna, Saeed Ramadan. He's the father of he's the father of two people. One of them who runs the Geneva Mosque now. This document was called The Project, written in Arabic, and it had a 10-point program of a long-term plan for the Muslim Brotherhood about infiltrating organizations. There's a book called La Conquête de l'Occident, which is by a Swiss journalist, which had this translated. Now, one of them, they call these, there were 10 strategies or points of departure. One of the main strategies or points of departure in this document called The Project, written by Saeed Ramadan, was about Israel being the touchstone of global unrest in order to secure the position of Muslims. Its main thrust was that Muslims were to infiltrate societies, to, even where there were ideological differences, to pretend that they were working alongside human rights, civil rights groups. But the main touchstone of their organization was to be using the Israel-Palestine conflict in order to get more recruits, more people to think, oh, poor oppressed Muslims. This is something that has been manufactured. Now, this document of The Project, I mean, Saeed Ramadan had died before this was actually discovered. It had been written in 1981, discovered 20 years later. But it is still valid, and it is exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood has been doing. As I said, we have these advisors. In Britain, you had the head, the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, founded by Kemal el-Helbawi, senior Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood member. Now, when Iqbal Siprani was in power, a month before we had our 7/7 bombings, Iqbal Siprani was given a knighthood by Tony Blair. He was the one who tried to extend our blasphemy laws at that time, which only affected Christianity. He wanted to extend them to include Islam. In 1996, there was a revivalist meeting held at the Central Mosque, the one in Regent's Park, and this man, Iqbal Siprani, was petitioning Michael Howard, the Home Secretary, to get a visa for Osama bin Laden to come and lecture to this Islam Revival Society, saying that he was an Islamic scholar. I mean, okay, that was 1996, but 2 years after that, that was when bin Laden authorized the two twin bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. You know,
they haven't got much money, though, have they? The Muslims, the fanaticists, they're not money rich.
There is a group called the Revival of Islamic Heritage Society, based in Kuwait, stinking rich, and it has funded all sorts of groups. Over the last, about 3 years ago, it cut back on its funding of terrorism, but it has been behind funding Al Qaeda for years. There was a group, the JMB, the Jamaat al-Mujahideen Bangladesh. 2005, they started with a small bombing campaign. They had the 64 districts of Bangladesh. They had minor bombings all over Bangladesh. But in the next year, that was August 2005. 2006, money from the Revival of Islamic Heritage Society came into that group. Their bombings they meant business. They were people, much bigger bombings. 2 people got killed in August 2005. They had suicide bombers, they had truck bombs and things like that. It really took off. I mean, all of their leadership were hanged.
What about the people that say the CIA are behind groups like ISIS?
I don't think they are. I think that in the past, what happened with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, 1979, you had an attack on Mecca, which led to, there was a crackdown. At that time, believe it or not, Saudi Arabia was becoming more liberal. There are photographs of a young Osama bin Laden dressed in Western clothing with his family on holiday in Sweden, none of his sisters wearing hijabs. In 1979, you had the attempt to have the Mahdi, their Messiah, by a group of fundamentalist Muslims, try to take over Mecca. One of the bin Laden family, they were doing building work in the tunnels around there. They invaded, took over Mecca. There was mass decapitations afterwards. There was a crackdown. People like Abdullah Azzam, Osama bin Laden's mentor, and also bin Laden himself. This was in November 1979. At that time, Russia had invaded Afghanistan. The Mujahideen evolved from these people who were fleeing Saudi Arabian crackdowns on extremists. They went to fight jihad in Afghanistan. Abdullah Azzam was writing his books like In Defense of Muslims' Lands and Come Join the Caravan, which were redefining what jihad should be. And this was where it was American support.
Oh my God, Adrian, we've come to the end of the show. You've been a fantastic guest and I've really enjoyed you. And next time I have a story on anything involved in terrorism, I'm going to ring you and ask for the answers because you're a mine of information. I'd like to have you back sometime.
That would be great. Well, thank you. I'm really sorry about the time and I'm sorry if I was rude to your question.
No, that's fine. But a fire never did anyone any harm. No, you're an amazing guest and such a mine of information. It's been fascinating. Thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks very much for my guest, Adrian Morgan. And you can find him, guys, on Facebook and join him there on Facebook if you want to chat to him. Thanks very much for listening, you guys. Have a wonderful Thursday night.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.